Welcome to the DIY Audio Guy YouTube channel. For today's adventure, I'm going to show you how I built this subwoofer enclosure. I'm going to show you some cool stuff, so make sure you stick around. Let's head over to the table saw and get the adventure started. I'm making this enclosure just for fun. This is an opportunity for me to try a few new things and build some of my skills. I've had this woofer laying around forever, so I'm just going to grab some scrap material that I've got left over from an old project. This is going to be a 0.75 cubic foot sealed enclosure. I drew up some plans and made a cut sheet, and before I do any cutting, I want to do some measuring to make sure that I've got enough material to actually build the enclosure. I've got my table saw set up for my first cut, but I always like to measure with a tape measure just to make sure the table saw is calibrated correctly. There's nothing worse than making all those cuts only to find out that the saw was off by a little bit and all of your cuts are wrong. It's very important that you always make the cuts of a given dimension all at the exact same time. So I've got the saw sit right here for 20 inches and I'm going to make all of my 20-inch cuts right now. That way if I happen to be off by a little bit, they'll all be off by the same amount and the box will still go together. If you're making a sealed enclosure, you should only move the table saw fence 3 times. I don't know why, but for some reason people on YouTube like to get a shot of them stacking up their pieces after they've cut them all out. So here it is. I always dry fit all of my pieces after I have them cut out so I can make sure they're going to fit just right. I'm going to be flush mounting this woofer, so I've set it here roughly where it's going to be mounted on the enclosure, and I'm going to measure the outside diameter. The outside diameter is 10.5 inches and the cutout is 9 1/8 of an inch. Now I don't have a rabbiting bit big enough to make that much of a recess in one pass, so what I've got to do is grab my circle jig and make multiple passes with my router. It's going to take 3 total passes to cut the recess so I can flush mount it. And then I'm going to make 2 more passes to cut out the circle. I don't want to cut out the circle in one pass because this material is 1 inch thick. And that's a pretty big bite for a 1/4 inch router bit. So I'm going to make that in 2 passes. And it fits like a glove. I knew it would because I made this test cut right here before I did it. I always make a test cut. It takes a little bit of extra time, but I know that my speaker cutout's gonna be right. So I've clamped a straight edge to my baffle. I'm just gonna run the router along that straight edge. Now the other end of the straight edge, the one you can't see at the shot, is mounted at a central point, and every time I move the straight edge, it always aims at that point. So all of these grooves are going to be radiating out from that point. Hopefully it'll make for a neat effect. Now the grooves did not come out perfectly straight. The router tried to walk a little bit on me as I was making these cuts. And that's all right. It doesn't have to be perfect because this is a chance for me to learn how to do a new thing. The next time I do this, I'm going to build a jig so that the router can't move from side to side the next time I'm cutting. Now it's time to start slathering on the glue and putting this enclosure together. This is always my favorite part because it feels like you're really getting a lot done when the enclosure starts to come together. My favorite type of mechanical fastener is the brad nail. Brad nails are quick and easy and they're cheap, and that's why I like them. What I like to do when I'm putting a box together is to use a bunch of clamps as extra hands to hold everything in place while I go around and drive the brad nails. I recently bought this cordless brad nailer. The main reason why I upgraded to the cordless model was because I was tired of constantly fighting the air hose, dragging it around the shop, having one more thing to trip over. The main downside to this particular cordless brad nailer is it's really bulky and sometimes it's hard to get it into tight spots. Here in this shot you can see that I put a little groove around the edges on the side. That groove is there to make it easier to wrap the box with carpet. I'm sure you've all seen that trick before. The box is assembled, but we're not done yet. Off camera, I went around the entire enclosure with a flush trim bit to make everything nice and smooth. Then I hit it with this roundover bit, and I'm going to follow that up with some sandpaper. Then I popped the hole saw into the drill, and I made a hole for the terminal cup. Here's something else I've never done before. I picked up some vinyl at a local craft store and I'm going to wrap this baffle in vinyl. I unrolled the vinyl and measured a piece that's a little bit oversized because it's better to have a little too much and trim it off later. And then I just cut it using a straight edge and a fresh blade in my utility knife. Off camera, I masked off the sides of the enclosure as well as the speaker cutout. Then I'm just going to take a brush and brush on the adhesive to both the back side of the vinyl and the baffle of the speaker enclosure. Then I've got to let it dry for 5 to 10 minutes before I can stick it together. And hey, while that's drying, let me give a shout out to my patrons over on Patreon. These guys help me out with a contribution to the channel. I want to give a special shout out to my newest patron, Nicholas. Hey Nicholas, welcome to the team. If you'd like to help me make DIY content, check the link down in the description and support me on Patreon. Now that the adhesive is dry, it's just a matter of sticking this vinyl to the enclosure. I start off on one side, then I begin to slowly work it around the baffle, pressing as I go and pushing it into my grooves. When I was building the box, I made sure to use my rabbiting bit to rabbit in some grooves around that baffle. This way I can just run my knife down that groove and have a nice clean seam where the vinyl transitions into the rest of the enclosure. The vinyl that I picked up didn't stretch well, and that was okay except in these corners. I had these dog ears in the corners and my thought was I could just trim these dog ears off like I oftentimes did with carpet, and that left a little bit of a seam. So in the future I'm going to need to find a better way to do that. But overall I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It's not too shabby for my first attempt at ever using vinyl. Now you're probably asking, what am I going to do with the rest of the enclosure? Hang on tight, I want to show you something really cool. So for the rest of the enclosure, I'm going to cover it in this carpet right here. This is some really cool stuff that I picked up at Sonic Electronics. This is adhesive backed carpet. So the carpet already has an adhesive applied to it, and all you gotta do is pull the paper backing off and stick it to the enclosure. So I've cut a piece to size and I'm going to do just that. I'm going to start by peeling back some of the paper backing, and I'm going to put the edge of the carpet into the rabbited groove on the back side of the baffle. And then I'm going to take my knife. You're going to notice this knife has a metal piece on the end of it. And that metal piece is perfect for working a piece of carpet into a groove like this. I'll make sure to give you a link to the knife down in the description. Now I can just flip the knife around and extend the blade and trim off the excess. Now I can finish carpeting the box, and you can see this carpet is a serious time saver. All I've got to do now is peel back that paper and roll the enclosure onto the carpet, and I'm done carpeting the box in just a matter of minutes. Now I'm going to use some scraps that I cut off earlier in order to cover up the sides of the enclosure. This is super easy to do because of that rabbited groove and this self-sticking carpet. As you can see, it's done in just a few seconds. Just to show you how much of a time saver this adhesive backed carpet can be, I didn't speed this segment up. Usually I put these things at double speed or triple speed because all I'm doing is running a knife in a groove, and that's not terribly entertaining. But this entire sequence lasted 1 minute and 17 seconds, so it took a whopping 1 minute and 17 seconds for me to put this piece of carpet on the side of this enclosure. This adhesive backed carpet is a serious time saver. Off camera, I wired everything up and I installed the terminal cup. To see some of my other builds, click on this playlist right here, or you can hit this subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next adventure.